You'd think filing one complaint would be enough. But Karen, she filed 12 in 1 week over things like my wind chimes sounding too joyful and my mailbox being too confident. I was done playing defense. So I did something no one in our HOA ever dared. I took Karen to the HOA courtroom. What happened next didn't just clear my name, it rewrote the rules of the entire neighborhood. And Karen, she didn't see it coming. The week from HOA hell. If I told you someone could file 12 official HOA complaints in a single week, you'd think I was exaggerating. I wish I was. It all started on Monday morning when I opened my mailbox and saw a neon orange slip that read, Violation number 1, wind chimes too loud, neighborhood tranquility disturbed. I stared at the paper in disbelief. My wind chimes? They barely whispered with the breeze. But I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen. Karen lived 3 houses down. She had a perfect lawn, a permanent scowl, and a clipboard that rarely left her side. She was the self-appointed watchdog of our HOA. While she wasn't on the board officially, she might as well have been the president, sheriff, and executioner rolled into one. Tuesday brought another notice. Violation number 2, front yard bird bath attracts too many birds. By Wednesday, things escalated quickly. Violation number 3, mailbox painted an unapproved shade of blue. Violation number 4, garage door left open for more than 15 minutes. Violation number 5, recycling bin visible from the sidewalk. Violation number 6, garden gnome looks hostile. Hostile? My gnome was holding a daisy. By Friday, I was drowning in complaint slips, 12 in total, and each one more ridiculous than the last. She even submitted one because my dog's leash was too long. Enough was enough. At first, I considered just riding it out. Most neighbors did. Karen had been pulling this stunt for years. Some moved away just to avoid her. But I wasn't going to be her next victim. I'd worked hard for this home. It was my sanctuary. And if she wanted war, I was ready. So I started doing what Karen never expected. I read the entire HOA bylaws handbook, all 146 pages of it. I highlighted every clause she had referenced in her complaints and discovered something juicy. You see, while Karen was great at filing complaints, she was awful at following the rules herself. Her backyard fence, 2 feet taller than regulation. Her hedges, blocking the sidewalk, a clear safety violation. She didn't even register her visiting family's vehicles for the HOA guest log, something she had fined me for once before. It was like finding her fingerprints on the very law book she swore by. So I gathered evidence, photos, timestamps, documentation. I even talked to other neighbors, and they had stories too. One told me Karen once cited them for having too many tulips. Another said she measured their Halloween decorations with a tape measure. When I asked if anyone wanted to help me file an official HOA counterclaim, 8 people joined in. I called the HOA office and requested a formal hearing in the HOA courtroom. It was rare, but not unheard of, a real board-attended meeting where grievances could be formally addressed. Usually these happened once or twice a year for big disputes. This time, it was about Karen. When the HOA administrator heard the list of names and violations Karen had allegedly committed herself, he paused and said, "You know what? I think it's time we review her conduct officially." We were on. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. That gave me just enough time to prep. Now here's the kicker. I didn't tell Karen. Let her show up thinking she was there for one of her petty complaints. Let her walk in with that smug little smirk and her file folder full of nonsense. I wanted her off guard. I wanted her to feel what we had felt, blindsided, cornered, and powerless. But the days leading up to the hearing weren't quiet. She dropped 2 more complaints in my mailbox, one because she said my new American flag was too vibrant, and another because I had too many wind-powered decorations in the backyard. Ironically, one of her own plastic flamingos had fallen over in her yard that day, flat on its back like a fallen soldier. I took a picture. Another violation. As D-Day approached, I rehearsed my presentation. I had compiled a slide deck with timestamps, pictures, and even quotes from the HOA bylaws. I labeled every page with tabs like I was going to court, because I was. When the morning of the hearing arrived, I wore a blazer, polished shoes, and brought my binder. I wasn't just there to defend myself. I was there to take her down. Karen showed up late. She sauntered in wearing her usual visor, a peach cardigan, and a frown deep enough to crack stone. She looked around the HOA meeting room, confused by how many of us were there. It wasn't just me, it was at least 10 neighbors, seated like a jury. When her name was called to the front, her eyebrows twitched. The HOA president said, "Karen, today's hearing is regarding a pattern of behavior and complaints both made by you and against you. You may have a seat. The floor will first go to Mr. Logan." That's me. And in that moment, I smiled for the first time in a week. I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, "I'm not here today to defend wind chimes or mailboxes. I'm here because one resident in this neighborhood has weaponized the HOA to harass the community, and we've had enough." I clicked the remote. Slide 1, the 12 complaints. Slide 2, her own violations. Slide 3, neighbor testimonials. One by one, I went through each item. My tone wasn't angry. It was professional, calm, and deliberate. I let the evidence speak for itself. I even showed a spreadsheet comparing how often she filed complaints versus any other resident. She had filed 53 in the past 6 months. The second highest, 3. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Karen sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her clipboard clutched like a life vest. That's when the HOA president turned to her and said, "Karen, do you have anything to say before we make a decision?" She stammered, "They're all breaking the rules. I'm upholding the standards." Someone whispered behind me, "You mean your standards?" The president nodded and said, "We'll take a short recess before our decision." As we stepped outside the room, Karen followed, pacing, muttering to herself. But I didn't engage. This wasn't personal anymore. It was about the whole neighborhood. And we were about to find out if justice, even HOA justice, still existed. Justice, gavel, and glitter. The HOA hearing resumed after a short recess. Karen was still visibly shaken, pacing in the hallway before reluctantly taking her seat again at the long oak table in the HOA's modest meeting room. The air was heavy with tension, the kind that builds right before a thunderstorm. Only this time, Karen was the one under the cloud. The HOA president, Mr. Decker, returned with 2 other board members. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. After reviewing the documentation and hearing testimony from residents, this board has come to a decision. Karen sat up straighter, gripping her pen. Effective immediately, all 12 complaints you submitted this week are dismissed for lack of merit. Further, due to the overwhelming evidence of misuse of HOA procedures and harassment toward fellow residents, we are placing you on a 6-month complaint probation. You may not file another formal complaint during that time. Karen's face turned red, then almost purple. "That's not fair. I'm trying to keep the neighborhood clean, safe. You're punishing me for doing my duty." Mr. Decker didn't flinch. "You're not an elected board member, Karen, and safety does not mean surveillance. Harassment is not enforcement." Then he looked at me. "Mr. Logan, thank you for compiling everything so professionally. We also reviewed your claim about Miss Karen's own HOA violations." He flipped through a folder, tapped the papers, and said, "Your photos and timestamps show multiple ongoing violations, from an oversized fence, blocked sidewalks, to unregistered guest vehicles. As such, Ms. Karen will receive formal notices and fines as outlined in the HOA handbook. You have every right to submit those claims." The room, full of neighbors, erupted into soft applause. Karen didn't say a word. She stood up, gathered her clipboard like it was the last piece of her armor, and stormed out without looking at anyone. That was the end of her reign. 1 week later. The neighborhood felt different, peaceful. For the first time in years, people started chatting at the mailbox again. Kids played longer on the sidewalks. Someone even organized a block party. And guess what? Karen wasn't invited. She kept to herself after that. Her clipboard? Nowhere to be seen. Her once perfect lawn started losing its edge. Like even her rose bushes knew she'd lost power. One afternoon, I came home to a small gift box on my doorstep. Inside was a mini plastic gavel with a thank you note signed by 8 neighbors. "You made the HOA livable again. Thank you for standing up." I smiled and put it on my bookshelf next to my stack of HOA bylaws. That evening, as I stood outside watering my perfectly regulation-sized shrubs, my neighbor James walked up, sipping a cold drink. "You know, you really should tell that story online," he said. "People love HOA revenge tales." I laughed. "You think anyone would believe me?" "Believe you? They'd subscribe for more." Subscribe moment, short, professional. By the way, if you love satisfying stories where justice gets served HOA style, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more where this came from. 2 months later, Karen tried to file another complaint after her probation ended. But guess what? Nobody took it seriously. The HOA had started implementing a new policy. Every complaint now required a photo and 2 separate confirmations from neighbors. Basically, Karen-proofing the system. She tried one last stunt, reporting a mailbox that she said reflected sunlight dangerously. But it was a standard metal box, and the HOA finally had enough. They voted to ban her from filing complaints indefinitely. Oh, the irony. Now, Karen keeps her lawn average, her flamingos regulated, and her opinions to herself. The woman who once measured wind chimes with a decibel meter now stays silent at meetings. Epilogue: the real win. Sometimes, standing up to a bully doesn't require yelling louder, just being smarter, calmer, and a little more persistent. It took 12 absurd complaints to push me into action, but once I stood up, others followed. And we didn't just win the case, we took our neighborhood back. And as for that gavel on my shelf, it reminds me that even when the system feels unfair, it can still be used for good, especially when Karen's the one abusing it. Because no matter how many rules she weaponized, in the end, the community chose peace over pettiness. And that's the biggest win of all.